silent roots. I killed the engine and stared at the forest. It wasn't like any forest I'd seen before, not the ones that grew in perfect rows near city parks and not the sprawling wildwoods in national preserves. This thing was alive. Not just alive in the biological sense, but alive in a way that made my skin crawl. The towering trunks seemed to lean toward each other, their canopies twisting into tangled webs that choked out the pale evening light. The bark glistened, slick and uneven, like it had been freshly peeled. I tightened my grip on the wheel. The locals had called it the Breathing Grove, and the name clung to me like the metallic tang in the air. I couldn't tell if it was humidity or my nerves, but every breath felt heavier the closer I got. "Don't go in," they'd said. No one had tried to stop me, they just stared wide-eyed and tight-lipped, as though speaking more might doom them too. One old man, stooped and brittle, had grabbed my wrist before I left. His eyes were pale and cloudy, but his voice was clear as glass. "It waits for you." I hadn't asked what "it" was. I opened the jeep door, stepping into the cool dusk air. The grass crunched beneath my boots, dry and brittle, though I hadn't seen a drought in the area. The only sound was the faint rustling of the wind. The forest loomed, its edge unnaturally sharp like the boundary of a painting. The tree line didn't fade into the horizon, it just stopped, an abrupt, jagged wall of black and green. I hoisted my pack onto my shoulders, my fingers brushing against the cold metal of my camera inside. Document everything, I reminded myself. That's why I was here, to study this strange, unmapped place. My first step onto the forest floor sent a chill through me. The moment my boot hit the roots, massive, gnarled things crisscrossing like a network of veins, the sound stopped. No crunch, no echo, just silence. I froze, staring down at the roots. They pulsed faintly, like they were breathing. The silence wrapped around me, heavy and oppressive. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of my own breathing seemed to exist anymore. I took another step, then another, each one swallowed whole by the forest. I pressed forward, scanning the area. The trunks were massive, their bark textured like scar tissue. They didn't grow upward in straight lines, but twisted and bent unnaturally, almost like they were reaching for something. A faint sound broke the silence, soft and rhythmic. I stopped, my pulse quickening. Click! It was distant, barely audible. Click, click! It grew louder, steady and deliberate. I swung my flashlight toward the sound, my fingers tightening on the handle. The beam sliced through the dark, bouncing off the slick bark of the trees. Nothing. My heart pounded as I turned slowly, the flashlight carving arcs through the shadowed undergrowth. The sound stopped as suddenly as it had begun. I took a step back, my foot catching on a root. I stumbled, falling hard onto the forest floor. My hands sank into the damp earth, slick and warm. Warm? I pulled my hands back, staring at the mud clinging to my palms. It wasn't mud, it was thick and black, oozing between my fingers. It smelled sharp, metallic like blood. I gagged, wiping it off on my jeans, my chest heaving. Click! The sound was closer now, too close. I scrambled to my feet, spinning in place. The flashlight flickered, and for a moment I saw something, a pair of glowing eyes, faint and ember-like, staring at me from the darkness. I froze, the air caught in my throat. The eyes didn't blink. Then they moved. Whatever it was shifted, its limbs, too many limbs, unfurling as it crept closer. Its body was massive, spindly, its movements jerky and unnatural. It didn't walk. It scuttled like an insect, and the clicking grew louder, reverberating through the silence. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't plan. My legs moved on instinct, carrying me away from the sound, away from those glowing eyes and the thing that shouldn't exist. The forest roared to life around me, the ground shifting beneath my feet. Roots rose and twisted, trying to catch me. Branches snagged my pack, pulling me back. The clicking followed, relentless and rhythmic, matching the frantic pounding of my heart. I didn't stop running until I saw the faint glow of my Jeep's headlights through the trees. My fingers fumbled with the keys. The sound of the creature's clicking burned into my ears. When I finally slammed the door shut and turned the ignition, the forest fell silent again. But as I sped away, I swore I saw those glowing eyes in the rearview mirror. I didn't go back to the forest immediately. I couldn't. The first time I'd run from something in my life, and it wasn't just a mistake. It was a failure. I hated the way my legs had carried me to safety without my permission. Hated the panic that had hollowed me out, leaving me shaking in the front seat of the Jeep, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard they went numb. But here I was again. The edge of the forest loomed like a boundary between worlds. This time the tree line didn't feel like an invitation, it felt like a threat. The trunks seemed closer together, the shadows deeper, the oppressive silence heavier. I adjusted the strap of my pack and stepped forward. The air thickened the moment I crossed into the grove. The metallic tang was sharper now, clinging to the back of my throat with each breath. The whispers started again, soft, faint impressions curling through my mind like smoke. "Why did you come back?" I ignored them, pushing forward. The roots were more tangled this time, twisting and curling like veins through the forest floor. They pulsed faintly beneath my boots, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were trying to trip me. The flashlight in my hand flickered, but I didn't stop. The dark pressed in closer with every step, my beam carving weak paths through the suffocating shadows. The clicking started again, faint and rhythmic like before. I froze, the sound sending a jolt of electricity down my spine. My head snapped toward the noise, but the trees obscured my view, their branches interlocking like a cage. Click! It was louder now, closer. My chest tightened as I scanned the trees, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The beam caught movement, just a flicker of something in the corner of my eye. I swung the light toward it, but there was nothing there. The clicking grew louder, faster, echoing through the trees like a signal. I stumbled backward, my pulse thundering in my ears. The forest felt smaller now, the trees pressing in like sentinels. The ground shifted beneath me, roots twisting and coiling like serpents. Then I saw them, the eyes. They glowed faintly in the dark, like embers burning through a haze of smoke. 2 at first, then 4, then more, their faint light scattered across a shape too large to comprehend. It moved. The clicking reached a fever pitch as the thing emerged from the shadows, its limbs, spindly and angular, scraping against the trunks as it dragged itself forward. The glow of its eyes shifted and pulsed, scattering across its face in patterns that didn't make sense. I didn't breathe, I didn't blink. It stopped just short of the flashlight's beam, its massive body folding and unfolding like a grotesque insect. Its claws clicked softly against the roots, each movement deliberate, calculated. I stumbled back, my foot catching on a raised root. The ground shifted again, and this time I felt it. Something underneath me, writhing, pulsing. The creature tilted its head, its glowing eyes locking onto me. Then it lunged. I hit the ground hard, the flashlight skittering out of my hand and spinning wildly. The beam flickered across the creature's body, its dripping claws, its twisting limbs, the black tar that oozed from its segmented joints. I scrambled backward, my hands clawing at the dirt as the withering closed the distance. Its clicking grew louder, more frantic, filling the air like a swarm of insects. I grabbed a rock, my fingers curling around its jagged edges, and hurled it at the creature. The sound it made when it struck was wet and hollow, like it had hit something soft and fragile. The creature stopped. Its glowing eyes flickered, its body twitching violently. For a moment I thought I'd hurt it. Then it let out a low guttural sound, a sound that reverberated through my chest and left my ears ringing. It wasn't pain, it was rage. I turned and ran. The forest came alive around me, the roots surging upward like snakes, the branches lashing out like claws. I didn't stop, didn't look back. The clicking followed me, relentless and rhythmic, closing the distance with every step. The forest didn't want me to leave. Neither did the witherling. I burst into a clearing, my chest heaving, my legs trembling. The air was cooler here, the metallic tang replaced by something sweeter. The forest was quiet again. I collapsed onto the ground, my fingers digging into the soft dirt. My breaths came in shallow gasps, the world spinning around me. For a moment I let myself believe I was safe. Then I saw it. At the edge of the clearing, half hidden by the shadows, the witherling stood. Its glowing eyes flickered faintly, its limbs twitching like it was struggling to hold itself together. It didn't move. Neither did I. The clearing wasn't safe. I realized that too late. I crouched low, my back pressed against the gnarled trunk of a tree at the clearing's edge. My breaths came in shallow gasps, each one more ragged than the last. The sweet scent in the air was cloying now, clinging to my skin and making my stomach turn. The witherling hadn't moved. It stood at the far edge of the clearing, its glowing eyes fixed on me. Its spindly limbs twitched and shifted, the joints clicking faintly in the oppressive silence. I didn't dare move. For a long moment neither of us did. The forest was still, its roots dormant, its whispers muted. It felt like a stalemate, a test of wills between predator and prey. And then it moved. Its body unfurled with a sickening creak, limbs stretching unnaturally as it scuttled forward. The clicking of its claws against the ground was sharp and deliberate, each step measured. I scrambled back, my fingers digging into the soft dirt, but the witherling didn't stop. Its glowing eyes pulsed faintly, their light reflecting off the black tar that dripped from its claws. It lunged. I threw myself to the side, the witherling's claws slicing through the space I'd just been. They slammed into the ground with a wet, heavy thud, spraying black ichor across the clearing. I hit the ground hard, pain shooting through my side. My flashlight was gone, lost in the chaos, and the darkness pressed in around me. The witherling clicked again, louder now, the sound reverberating through the clearing like an echo in a cavern. I crawled backward, my hands clawing at the dirt as it advanced. The ground shifted beneath me, the roots coiling like serpents, but they didn't attack. They didn't need to. The witherling was close enough now that I could see the faint ridges on its segmented limbs, the way its claws glistened in the dim light, its head tilted, the glowing eyes shifting and rippling like trapped fireflies. It was studying me, and then it struck. Its claws slammed into the ground beside me, and I screamed, rolling to the side just in time to avoid the blow. The ground split open where the claw had landed, black ooze bubbling up from the wound like blood. I grabbed a branch, thick, solid, something I could swing, and lashed out. The branch struck its torso with a dull thud, but the witherling didn't react. It lunged again, its movements faster now, more frantic. I swung the branch wildly, the wood cracking against one of its limbs, and it let out a guttural clicking sound that vibrated through my skull. I ran. The forest came alive as I fled, the roots surging upward to block my path, the branches above me twisted and bent, their jagged tips tearing at my pack. The witherling's clicks followed me, relentless and rhythmic, echoing through the trees like a signal. I tripped on a root, falling hard onto the forest floor. My palms slammed into the dirt and I gasped. The wind knocked from my lungs. The whispers surged again, louder now, curling through my mind like smoke. Run! 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 I pushed myself up and stumbled forward, my legs trembling. The forest seemed endless, the path twisting and looping back on itself. The clicking grew louder, closer. I didn't look back. I burst into another clearing, the forest giving way to an open space bathed in faint, silvery light. The air was cooler here, the oppressive weight of the forest lifting slightly. But the witherling followed. It emerged from the shadows, its massive body unfurling as it stepped into the clearing. The glowing eyes scattered across its face pulsed faintly. their light cutting through the darkness like embers. It stopped just short of the centre of the clearing, its limbs twitching. The clicking softened, fading into a faint, rhythmic hum. I didn't move. My chest heaved, my pulse thundering in my ears. For a moment I thought it was over, and then the ground shifted beneath me. I stumbled as the roots surged upward, coiling around my ankles. The whispers grew louder, screaming now, a chaotic chorus of voices in my mind. "You can't leave! You're ours!" The withering clicked again, louder this time, and lunged, not at me, but at the roots. Its claws tore through the tendrils with terrifying precision, black ichor spraying from the wounds. The forest screamed, a deep guttural sound that shook the clearing. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and ran, the whispers chasing me as I fled into the trees. I don't remember how far I ran, but the forest didn't seem to end. The trees loomed closer together, their branches twisting into a canopy so dense it blocked out even the faintest light. The air grew heavier with every step, clinging to my skin like wet cloth. The ground beneath my boots pulsed faintly, the roots writhing as if alive. The whispers came back, soft and insidious, crawling into my thoughts like insects. "You're part of this now. You can't leave." I tried to shake them off, focusing on the beam of my flashlight as it cut through the oppressive dark. The light wavered, flickering weakly, but it was enough to keep moving. And then I saw it. A massive tree rose from the darkness ahead, its trunk twisted and blackened like charred flesh. It was wider than any tree I'd ever seen, its bark slick with a faint, glowing substance that pulsed in rhythm with the roots beneath me. At its base was an altar. The altar was cracked and weathered, half buried in the dirt and roots. Strange carvings covered its surface, spirals, twisting and overlapping, their lines so fine they seemed to move when I stared at too long. I knelt beside it, brushing away the dirt with trembling hands. My flashlight flickered over the carvings, revealing more details. Figures bent in supplication, their bodies entwined with roots. Above them loomed a towering tree, its branches outstretched like claws. But it wasn't the tree that caught my attention. It was the figure beneath it. At first I thought it was human. It had a torso, arms and a head, but the proportions were all wrong. Its limbs were too long, its body too thin, its head crowned with jagged, angular shapes. My stomach turned as I traced the figure with my fingers. The resemblance was unmistakable. It was the Witherling. "What the hell is this?" I whispered, my voice breaking the heavy silence. The whispers surged in response, louder now, their tone almost frantic. "Don't look. Stop. You'll wake it." The ground shifted beneath me, the roots coiling tighter. A deep, guttural hum vibrated through the air, rising from somewhere deep within the massive tree. I stumbled back, my flashlight beam swinging wildly across the clearing. The carvings seemed to writhe, the spirals twisting into shapes I couldn't comprehend. The hum grew louder, resonating through my chest, and then the faces appeared. They were embedded in the tree's trunk, their features stretched and distorted, their mouths open in silent screams. Their eyes rolled wildly, darting back and forth as if searching for something or someone. The whispers screamed in unison, "Run!" I turned to flee, but the roots surged upward, wrapping around my ankles and dragging me to the ground. My flashlight tumbled from my hand, spinning wildly as it hit the dirt. The ground shuddered violently, and I clawed at the roots, trying to free myself. The faces on the tree twisted and writhed, their mouths widening impossibly as the hum became deafening. I screamed as the roots dragged me closer to the altar, the air thick with the smell of decay and copper. The clicking started softly, almost drowned out by the forest's screams. Then it grew louder, sharper, cutting through the chaos like a knife. The roots stopped moving. I looked up just in time to see the Witherling emerge from the shadows, its glowing eyes pulsing faintly, as it stepped into the clearing. Its spindly limbs twitched, black ichor dripping from its claws as it clicked rhythmically, the sound reverberating through the clearing. It didn't hesitate. The witherling lunged at the roots holding me, its claws slicing through them with terrifying precision. The forest roared in protest, the faces on the tree writhing violently as black tar sprayed from the severed tendrils. For a moment I thought it was helping me, then its glowing eyes locked onto mine and I saw something behind them, something ancient and hungry. It clicked again, softer this time, and tilted its head as if studying me. And then it moved. I didn't know if I was running towards safety or straight into the forest's jaws. The witherling's glowing eyes stayed with me, burned into my vision every time I blinked. My legs trembled as I stumbled through the undergrowth, the air thick and metallic in my throat. Every breath felt like it carried more of the forest inside me. The whispers didn't stop. They slithered through my thoughts like smoke, curling tighter with every step. You can't leave. It won't let you. The clicking started again, faint and rhythmic like a clock ticking down. I froze, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam flickered across the dense trees, their trunks twisting like grotesque figures frozen mid-dance. Click. The sound was closer this time, deliberate. Click, click. I turned sharply, the flashlight bouncing wildly, catching flashes of movement in the shadows. Something spindly and angular darted between the trees, too fast to focus on. My chest tightened as I took a step back, my boots catching on the tangled roots. Click! It was behind me. I turned to run, but the ground shifted beneath me, the roots coiling like serpents around my feet. I hit the dirt hard, my flashlight skittering out of reach, the darkness closed in around me, broken only by the faint, pulsing glow of the witherling's eyes. The creature emerged from the shadows, its massive body folding and unfolding with grotesque precision. Its limbs twitched, claws clicking against the roots as it moved closer. I scrambled backward, my hands clawing at the pulsing ground. The whispers screamed in my head, "It's coming! You're done!" The witherling stopped just short of me, its glowing eyes fixed on mine. For a moment it didn't move, its body frozen in an unnatural crouch. Then it clicked again, louder this time, and lunged. I screamed as its claws struck the ground beside me, black ichor spraying from the roots. The forest roared in response, the trees shuddering violently as the witherling slashed through the coiling tendrils. I didn't understand. Was it attacking the forest or me? It didn't matter. I grabbed the flashlight and scrambled to my feet, running blindly into the shadows. The clicking followed, relentless and rhythmic, closing the distance with every step. The forest didn't let me escape easily. The roots rose like walls, blocking my path, forcing me into tighter and tighter spaces. The whispers clawed at my thoughts, louder now, more insistent. "Stop running, you're part of this." I tripped over a thick root, my knees slamming into the ground. Pain shot through my legs, but I didn't stop. I crawled forward, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The clicking was deafening now, echoing through the trees like a swarm of insects. The witherling's glowing eyes flickered in the dark, closing in from all sides. I turned a corner and froze. The web was in front of me, stretched between two massive trunks. Its strands glowed faintly, thick and sticky, dripping with the same black tar that coated the witherling's limbs. There was no way around it. The witherling emerged from the shadows behind me, its body towering and spindly, its limbs twitching violently. Its glowing eyes pulsed brighter, their light cutting through the oppressive dark. I turned to run, but the roots surged upward, wrapping around my legs and dragging me to the ground. The whispers screamed, "It's over! It's over! You're ours!" The witherling lunged, its claws slicing through the air. I braced for the impact, my body curling into itself, but it didn't strike me. It struck the web. The creature tore through the glowing strands with terrifying precision, its claws slashing and ripping until the entire structure collapsed. Black ichor sprayed from the severed threads, hissing as it hit the ground. The forest roared in protest, the roots shuddering and retreating. I stared, frozen in place, as the witherling turned to face me. Its glowing eyes flickered, its body twitching violently as if struggling to hold itself together. It clicked softly, almost mournfully, and tilted its head. Then it lunged again. The forest spat me out into another clearing, but I didn't feel relief. It wasn't safety, it was a trap. I could feel it in the air, thicker and heavier here, clinging to my lungs like smoke. At the centre of the clearing stood the ruins, ancient, crumbling structures that looked like they had been swallowed by the forest and spit back out in pieces. Black roots coiled through the broken stones, wrapping tightly around the fractured pillars and splitting them apart. And then there was the tree. It was massive, its trunk wider than a house, its bark gnarled and blackened as though it had been burned. The roots writhed beneath it like a nest of snakes, glowing faintly with the same red ichor I'd seen before. Faces were embedded in the trunk. They weren't carvings, they were real. Human faces, their features distorted and stretched, their mouths open in silent screams. Their eyes followed me as I stepped closer, rolling wildly in their sockets. The whispers were louder now, a cacophony of voices overlapping in my head. "Stop! Don't look! You don't want to see!" But I couldn't stop. The altar stood in front of the tree, cracked and weathered, its surface etched with carvings. They were spirals, overlapping and twisting into themselves, their lines so fine they seemed to shift when I stared at them. And then I saw it. The figure beneath the tree. It was humanoid, but just barely. Its body was elongated, its limbs unnaturally thin, its head crowned with jagged shapes. The carving was intricate, every detail carefully etched, and I felt bile rise in my throat as I realized what it was. The witherling. "What the hell are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The ground shifted beneath me and I stumbled back as the tree began to hum. It was low at first, barely audible, but it grew louder, vibrating through my chest. The roots writhed more violently, twisting and snapping, and the faces on the trunk began to scream. The whispers surged, screaming over each other in a chaotic frenzy. "You shouldn't have come here! You shouldn't have seen this!" The air grew colder and I turned sharply as the clicking began. Again, it was faint at first, distant, but it grew louder, faster, more frantic. The witherling emerged from the shadows, its limbs twitching violently, its glowing eyes pulsing with a faint, flickering light. It wasn't stalking now, it was running, straight toward me. I stumbled backward, my hands clawing at the ground as I tried to get away. The witherling clicked louder, its claws slamming into the dirt as it lunged toward me. I screamed as its claws struck the ground beside me, black ichor spraying from the roots. The forest roared in response, the trees shuddering violently as the witherling tore into the ground with terrifying precision. For a moment I thought it was trying to kill me, but it wasn't. It was attacking the roots. The creature's claws tore through the pulsing tendrils, black ichor spraying in all directions. The faces on the tree writhed and screamed, their mouths stretching impossibly wide as the hum reached a deafening pitch I didn't understand. The witherling turned toward me, its glowing eyes locking onto mine. Its body twitched violently, its limbs bending at unnatural angles as it clicked softly, almost mournfully. And then it lunged again, not at me, at the altar. Its claws ripped through the ancient stone, sending shards flying as the spirals shattered. The tree screamed, its trunk splitting open as the roots twisted and writhed. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I turned and ran, the whispers chasing me into the darkness. The forest wasn't letting me go. The air grew heavier with every step, each breath tearing at my lungs like smoke. The whispers didn't stop, but now they were louder, angrier, as though the forest itself was screaming at me. "You can't leave. You're part of this. You belong." The The ground beneath me shifted and writhed, the roots surging upward like living things, trying to block my path. I stumbled over them, my knees slamming into the dirt, but I kept moving. My flashlight flickered weakly, its beam cutting feebly through the oppressive dark. Behind me, the clicking was relentless. The witherling wasn't stopping, its limbs scraping against the trees as it pursued me. I didn't know how far away it was. I didn't want to know. The forest roared around me, the roots lashing out with renewed fury. They coiled around my ankles, my wrists, tearing at my clothes and dragging me down. Stop running. Accept it. No! I screamed, clawing at the roots. My hands were slick with black ichor, the substance burning faintly against my skin. I kicked and thrashed, desperate to free myself, but the roots tightened their grip. The whispers shifted, turning cold and deliberate. We'll take you, piece by piece. The ground beneath me pulsed, and I felt something move, something massive and alive twisting beneath the surface. The forest was alive, and it was waking up. The clicking grew louder, closer, and then the witherling was there. It didn't hesitate. Its claws tore through the roots with terrifying precision, black ichor spraying into the air as it ripped them apart. The forest screamed again, the sound reverberating through my chest, shaking the ground beneath me. For a moment I thought it would turn on me next. Its glowing eyes flickered as it turned toward me, its spindly limbs twitching violently. But it didn't attack. Instead it clicked softly, almost hesitantly, and tilted its head. "Why?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "Why are you doing this?" It didn't answer, of course. It just clicked again, louder this time, and turned away. The roots surged upward once more, but the witherling was faster. It tore through them, its claws slicing through the writhing tendrils with brutal efficiency. The forest retaliated, its screams turning into a low guttural hum that vibrated through the air. The ground beneath the witherling split open, black ichor spilling out as more roots erupted from the earth. It didn't stop. It kept fighting, its glowing eyes fixed on the roots, its claws moving with mechanical precision. "Run," I heard it say. Not a whisper, not a sound. A thought pressed into my mind so forcefully it made my head spin. I didn't wait to question it. I turned and ran, the forest roaring behind me, the whispers screaming in my head. The trees seemed to part ahead of me, their branches twisting and snapping as I pushed forward. The witherling's clicks faded behind me, drowned out by the forest's deafening screams. And then finally I saw the light. The tree line was just ahead, the faint glow of the outside world spilling through the gaps. My legs burned, my chest heaved, but I didn't stop. The whispers grew fainter, the roots less aggressive. The forest was letting me go, but not without a cost. When I finally burst out of the forest, I collapsed onto the ground, my body trembling. The air was clean here, sharp and cold, free of the metallic tang that had clung to me in the grove. I looked back at the forest, expecting to see the witherling chasing after me, but it wasn't there. The forest stood in silence, its edge sharp and unnatural, as though it was a separate world entirely. The whispers were gone, the roots still, but the weight of it lingered. I got to my feet slowly, my legs unsteady. My clothes were torn, my hands streaked with black ichor that burned faintly against my skin. And my ankle, where the roots had grabbed me, was bruised and swollen. The veins around it dark and branching outward like cracks in glass. I took a step forward, then another, but the weight didn't lift. The forest wasn't done with me. It never would be. The city felt different now. It wasn't the same place I'd left before stepping into the forest. The buildings were still here, the lights still flickered, and the streets were still wet with rain. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't belong anymore. Or maybe it wasn't the city that had changed. Maybe it was me. I parked my Jeep in the lot behind my apartment, letting the engine hum for a few moments before shutting it off. My hands lingered on the wheel, my knuckles pale and stiff. For the first time in hours there was no clicking, no whispers, and yet I could still feel it. The weight, the forest, the air inside my apartment was stale and thick when I stepped in, as if it had been waiting for me to return. I tossed my bag to the floor and leaned against the door, locking it behind me. The quiet was deafening. I stared at my reflection in the window. My face looked pale, hollow, like I'd been hollowed out and refilled with something else. My hands were still streaked with black ichor, and my ankle throbbed where the roots had coiled around me. I rolled up my pant leg, and my breath caught in my throat. The veins weren't just bruised anymore. They were black and branching out in jagged patterns, creeping up toward my calf. The skin around them pulsed faintly, warm to the touch. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over the chair behind me. My pulse raced as I grabbed my phone, flipping on the flashlight and shining it over my ankle. The light made the veins shimmer. They weren't just spreading, they were growing. I sank into the chair, my hands trembling. The whispers were gone, but the forest wasn't. It was inside me now, a part of me. I could feel it pulsing in my chest, coiling around my thoughts, wrapping its roots into every inch of my mind. I wasn't free. I didn't sleep that night. The weight in the air grew heavier as the hours passed, pressing down on me like the forest had followed me home. The plants on my balcony swayed in the windless dark, their leaves curling unnaturally toward the window. And then I saw it. The sapling. It wasn't there before, not when I moved in, not when I'd left for the grove. But there it was now, growing from a crack in the concrete. Its bark was black and slick, its branches thin and reaching, its roots twisting out of sight. I opened the door to the balcony slowly, stepping out into the cool night air. The city stretched out below me, its lights dim and flickering. The sapling's roots shifted faintly, the sound almost imperceptible. I crouched beside it, my breath catching in my throat. The bark rippled like skin, faintly translucent, and I swore I saw something moving beneath the surface. A face. The whispers came back then, soft and insidious, curling through my thoughts like smoke. You're part of this now. I stumbled back into the apartment, slamming the door behind me. My pulse hammered in my ears as I grabbed a chair, wedging it under the handle. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent. You can't leave, you belong to us. My reflection in the glass shifted. It was faint at first, just a flicker of movement that didn't match mine. Then it tilted its head, its glowing eyes pulsing faintly in the dark. And I knew I'd never left the forest. The sapling wasn't the last sign. It was only the beginning. Over the next few days, the changes became impossible to ignore. The plants in my apartment grew unnaturally fast, their leaves curling toward me as though reaching for something unseen. Vines sprouted from cracks in the walls, their tendrils winding toward the floor like they were searching. The black veins on my legs spread further, twisting up my thigh in jagged spirals. They pulsed faintly beneath my skin, warm to the touch, and when I pressed my hand against them, I swore I felt something move. The whispers never stopped. They were always there, coiling through my thoughts like smoke, soft and insidious. Sometimes they whispered in words I couldn't understand. Other times they repeated the same haunting phrase, "You're part of this now." I stopped leaving the apartment. The outside world didn't feel real anymore. The streets, the people, the noise, it was all distant, muted, like I was watching it through a window. The forest was still inside me and it was growing. The sapling on the balcony had changed too. It wasn't small anymore. Its trunk had thickened, its roots spreading across the concrete like veins. The bark rippled faintly, its surface almost translucent, and I could see things shifting beneath it. Faces, their features distorted, their mouths stretched open in silent screams. It was alive. It was waiting. That night I dreamed of the forest. I was back in the clearing, standing before the massive tree with its writhing roots and screaming faces. The altar was whole again, its spirals shifting and twisting in impossible patterns, and the witherling was there. It stood at the base of the tree, its spindly limbs twitching, its glowing eyes fixed on me. The whispers grew louder as I stepped closer, overlapping in a chaotic chorus. "You will return. You belong." The witherling tilted its head, the light in its eyes pulsing faintly. "Why?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why me?" It didn't answer. Instead, it clicked softly, mournfully, and pointed toward the altar. When I looked down, I saw my reflection in its surface, but it wasn't me. The face staring back at me was pale and hollow, its eyes glowing faintly with the same ember-like light as the witherling's. The whispers surged. "You're part of us. You always were." I woke up screaming. The sapling had grown taller overnight. It towered over the balcony now, its branches twisting and reaching upward like skeletal fingers. The bark was slick with black ichor, and the faint glow beneath its surface had grown brighter. I couldn't stay here. I grabbed my keys and stumbled out of the apartment, my body trembling as the whispers followed me into the hall. The air was thick and heavy, suffocating, and every step felt like dragging myself through quicksand. When I reached the street, I stopped. The city was quiet. Too quiet. The streetlights flickered faintly, their glow dim and pale. The asphalt beneath my feet pulsed faintly, like the roots of the forest had followed me here, spreading through the cracks in the pavement. And then I heard it. Click! The sound was faint at first, distant, but it grew louder with each step I took. My pulse quickened as I turned in a frantic circle, my eyes scanning the shadows. Click! Click! The witherling stepped out of the dark, its spindly limbs folding and unfolding as it moved closer. Its glowing eyes pulsed faintly, their light cutting through the haze like embers. It stopped just a few feet from me, its body twitching violently. For a moment neither of us moved. Then it tilted its head, its claws scraping softly against the pavement. "You never left," it whispered, the words pressing into my mind like a brand. "You never will." The whispers surged, louder now, a deafening chorus of voices that drowned out everything else. The witherling clicked again, softer this time, and stepped forward. Its glowing eyes burned brighter as it reached out, its claws hovering just inches from my chest. And then it stopped. The whispers faded into silence, and the witherling tilted its head once more, almost sadly. Then it turned and disappeared into the shadows. But the forest didn't. I could feel it spreading through me, through the city, through everything. I didn't escape. I never would.